Youth Organization, founded in 2022, constitutes an additional asset for promotion of multilateralism within the movement. Through this entity, the movement has the opportunity to exchange views on the challenges faced by young people in member states in ensuring their sustainable development and opportunities for joint solutions by the governments of their countries. Headquartered in Baku, capital of Azerbaijan, the NAM Youth Organization, with solid structure and clear, result-oriented vision, will enable the NAM youth community to address the youth development-related challenges more effectively and to convey the unified messages of NAM youth to the international community in a more systematic way. In a very important move, Azerbaijani chairmanship has also proposed the establishment of the NAM Women's Platform, a framework cooperation among NAM member states on the empowerment of women and advancing the rights of women. Convening of NAM conference on advancing the rights and empowerment of women in fall of 2023 in Azerbaijan was a first step towards this end. It is worth to note that with support of member states, Azerbaijani chairmanship reinvigorated the implementation of the right to development as an inalienable human right. With adoption of resolution on the right to development at Human Rights Council in October of 2023, the draft International Covenant on the Right to Development was submitted to the UN General Assembly for its consideration, negotiation, and subsequent adoption. Excellencies, I am also delighted to share that during Azerbaijani chairmanship, we had certain milestone achievements towards enlargement of the movement. During our chairmanship, the non-aligned movement has been expanded in both its membership and observer composition. At the mid-term NAM Ministerial Summit held in Baku, the Russian Federation was granted an observer status in the movement. At the ministerial meeting of NAM Coordinating Bureau held in Baku in July 2023, we have agreed to forward the request of South Sudan, the only non-NAM member state from African continent, for full-fledged membership in the non-aligned movement to the Kampala summit. Admission of the South Sudan will be the first expansion of NAM membership in 13 years, bringing the number of member states to 121. This proves a growing validity and increased importance of our movement in the international relations system. Azerbaijani chairmanship has made consistent efforts to promote the practice of demonstrating support to nominations of NAM member states to various positions in the international organizations. Among other chairmanship activities, Azerbaijan has also revitalized the coordinating mechanism of member states within UNESCO by organizing regular ambassadorial meetings, special events, and establishment of database of nominations of member states to the elected positions at UNESCO. We have established NAM Caucus within UNESCO Executive Board. As part of our activities within NAM Paris chapter, we have also established NAM Caucus within International Organization of Francophonie. Azerbaijani chairmanship has also attached particular importance to the development efforts of the NAM member states. Upon the decree of the President of the Republic of Azerbaijan, we have provided scholarship opportunities for students from NAM member states to enroll in undergraduate, graduate, and other degree programs in more than 20 colleges and universities of the country. Excellencies, these were some highlights from multidimensional and intense activities of Azerbaijani NAM chairmanship from 2019 to 2024. Excellencies, at this historic moment, after 4 years of proudly chairing the movement, we are handing over the chairmanship to the Republic of Uganda with a rich, substantial, and institutional legacy. We are confident that Uganda will spare no effort towards further enhancing the role and visibility of the movement and strengthening unity among its member states. I would like to reiterate that although our chairmanship came to an end, our passion and determination for the success of NAM will always remain strong. We will continue to contribute to a just cause pursued by the movement within the NAM Troika. I wish the distinguished friends from Uganda all the best in their chairmanship and express our readiness to extend all the necessary support in this process. Azerbaijan is proud to take over a new important international responsibility. In fall 2024, Baku will be hosting the 29th Conference of Parties to the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. As the host of COP29, we rely on precious support by the NAM member states and look forward to welcoming you to Azerbaijan. I thank you all. Ladies and gentlemen, the next item in the agenda is election by acclamation of the chair of the 19th Summit of the Heads of State and Government of NAM. I propose the distinguished delegations to elect by acclamation His Excellency, Mr. Yoweri Museveni, President of the Republic of Uganda, as chair of the 19th Summit of the Heads of State and Government of NAM. So I declare His Excellency, Mr. Yoweri Museveni, as the chair of the 19th Summit of the Heads of State and Government of NAM. I invite His Excellency to assume his chairmanship. The floor is yours, Mr. Chair, and thank you very much.
His Excellency, in absentia, the President of Azerbaijan, who has been our chairperson for the last 3 years, who is represented here by the Foreign Minister who was speaking a little while ago. Excellencies, the heads of state and government and the heads of delegations of the non-aligned movement. Excellency, representing the Secretary General of the UN, Antonio Guterres. Excellency Denis Francis, President of the 78th session of the UN General Assembly. Her Excellency, the Vice President of Uganda, and all other government and party leaders of Uganda. Fellow Ugandans, ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure to welcome Your Excellencies, the heads of state and governments, and the heads of delegations of the non-aligned movement countries. This grouping of countries accounts for 4.46 billion people of the world. It was started by our far-sighted elders in the persons of His Excellency Sukarno of Indonesia, His Excellency Jawaharlal Nehru of India, His Excellency Gamal Abdel Nasser of Egypt, and His Excellency Zhou Enlai of China, when they met in Bandung, Indonesia, in 1955. That time I was in primary 3 in the school. The first summit of the non-aligned movement took place in Belgrade, Yugoslavia, in 1961, and was attended by Afghanistan, Algeria, Burma, Cambodia, Ceylon, Congo, Cuba, Cyprus, Ethiopia, Ghana, Guinea Conakry, I think here we're talking of Guinea Conakry, India, Indonesia, Iraq, Lebanon, Mali, Morocco, Nepal, Saudi Arabia, Somalia, Sudan, Tunisia, United Arab Republic, Egypt, Yemen, and Yugoslavia. The emergence of the non-aligned movement was a necessary antidote to the irrational polarization of the world of that time between the capitalist Western countries and the communist, mainly Eastern countries. By the early 1960s, our student group was already beginning to be active. We were the third generation of the African anti-colonial freedom fighters. The first generation had been the African-American Pan-Africanists, such as Marcus Garvey, George Padmore, W.B. Du Bois, that had been joined by those who founded the African National Congress of South Africa in 1912. By 1900, the whole of Africa, except for Ethiopia, had been colonized. This direct colonization of the whole of the African continent was the culmination of 400 years of the plunder of Africa by the evil imperialist forces in the form of slave trade and the genocide wars that went with it. The newly discovered Americas, Asia, China, and the Pacific, Australia, New Zealand, and so on, had been similarly aggressed, colonized, semi-colonized, like in the case of China, and plundered. Africa's capitulation, Africa's surrender had been in part on account of our egocentric chiefs and kings who, out of selfishness, could not unite us to fight these evil people. The second generation of the African freedom fighters were people like Mzee Jomo Kenyatta of Kenya, Mwalimu Nyerere of Tanzania, Nelson Mandela of South Africa, etc., who emerged in the 1940s. When we therefore came on the scene in the 1960s, we were generation 3 of the anti-colonial fighters. We seriously studied the interplay of forces that had ultimately led Africa in such a calamity. In those studies, we used the instrument of political economy, which is a study that helps us to discover the fundamental laws that govern the motion of society from one social system to another. What prompts society to change from one form of social system to another? That was our big study. We had to study the dynamics of social change. In that study, we discovered that man, the Homo sapiens sapien, who emerged here in Africa 4.5 million years ago, had been the main actor. Initially, this wise man, that is what Homo sapiens sapien means, was coping with the oppression of man by nature in the form of the floods, the droughts, the diseases, the wild animals, the earthquakes, etc. These natural phenomena were, of course, oppressing other creatures, such as the wild animals, the plants, as well. However, those other creatures could do little or nothing to tame nature. The only thing they could do was to adapt themselves to nature in order to survive. That is how the beaver in the cold climates hibernates during the winters so as to survive. It is only a man that has the ability to try and tame the natural phenomena and harness them to improve his quality of life. Why does man have this capacity? It is because of the three characteristics of man. These are a superior brain that is able to reason and not only act by instinct, a hand that can make and use tools to do work, and bipedalism, ability to walk on two legs with the head up instead of the head being down like a reptile, trying to navigate among ground-based obstacles, that enables man to see far and think. These characteristics enabled man to invent tools, starting with stone tools, wooden tools, iron tools, until today, when he is able to make tractors and machine tools, etc. These tools enabled man to make scientific inventions that precipitated qualitative and quantitative changes in society. The invention of fire 1.5 million years ago caused society to move from dwelling in trees to dwelling in caves and on the ground generally. Caves were more comfortable than the trees. The invention of the domestication of crops around 10,000 years ago, the domestication of the livestock around 12,000 years ago, the invention of the iron around 1,500 BC, the steam engine, the printing press, electricity, the railway, the automobiles, the aircraft, the automation, vaccines, the invention of penicillin, the invention of quinine, etc., enabled man to cope better and enabled him to harness natural phenomena and items for the betterment of his life. Our study of political economy of creation and society, therefore, enabled us to discover that the best primer of changes prima means initiator of changes in society, is the development of science and technology. Therefore, societies that move forward their levels of science and technology lay a basis for positive social change and should be encouraged by the progressive forces of the world. This encouragement should be irrespective of the social systems of the concerned societies. However, when man's inventiveness was handling the operation of man by nature, another form of operation of man emerged. This was the operation of man by fellow men. So man had two problems now: operation of man by nature, operation of man by fellow men. This was the operation of man by fellow men. Karl Marx is one of the few analysts that seems to have tackled this new problem for man accurately. He pointed out that it was only during the time of the primitive communalism, when man was still living in hunter-gatherer societies, that society was free of oppression of man by fellow men. Thereafter, all subsequent social systems had elements of oppression of fellow men of varying degrees. This was in the form of wars of conquest, wars of aggression, slavery, imperialism, neocolonialism, colonialism, feudalism, primitive capitalist accumulation, chauvinism, etc. These elements of exploitation are totally unnecessary and only propelled by greed. Was it necessary for the Ottomans to block the Europeans from using the Silk Road that had been pioneered by Marco Polo when they captured oppression will invite resistance. That is why we, the resistance fighters of Uganda, only fight just wars. Having failed to defend our sovereignty, except for Menelik of Ethiopia, who defeated the Italian aggressors in 1896. It took the modern African resistance fighters only 82 years to clear the whole of Africa of these invaders, with South Africa being the last to get freedom in 1994. In that 82 years, you had the Mau Mau in Kenya, the resistance wars in Algeria, Mozambique, Angola, Guinea-Bissau, Namibia, South Africa, Zimbabwe, etc. We won everywhere. Our African brothers in all these wars won. But after losing a lot of time, why had the imperialists thought of dominating us in the first place? Therefore, the non-aligned movement was correct. The illogical polarization of the 1940s, 1950s, 60s, 70s, between the capitalists and communists was wrong. Why should new ideas cause tension? This was the mistake of people like Metternich of Austria-Hungary, who thought that the new ideas of capitalism that were challenging the feudal order in Europe could be blocked by war. The Austro-Hungarian Empire ended up disappearing from the face of the earth, and capitalism did not stop spreading. Our stand is that the world should concentrate on the common human problems, prosperity through trade, and that's why I'm very happy to see you here. When you are outside there, you may get stereotypes about Africa, that Africa, they have no food, they are starving. Here we are dying from food. We have so much food here. So those images which you see about some bad situations, don't think they represent the whole of Africa. Africa has got everything. Here we have everything. What we need from other people are markets and investments. But we shall not only sell to you, we shall also buy from you. We are not like others who want only to sell to others but not to buy from them. So I'm very glad to have this big presence of people from the world so that we can interact with you. Our stand is that the world should concentrate on the common human problems: prosperity through trade, the advance of science and technology to deal with human problems, the environment, crime, and terrorism. The future is bright if we act right. These are indeed the Bandung principles of 1, respect for fundamental human rights and for the purposes of the principles of the Charter of the United Nations, respect for the sovereignty and territorial integrity of all nations, recognition of the equality of all races and of the equality of all nations, large and small, abstention from intervention or interference in the internal affairs of another country, respect for the right of each nation to defend itself singly or collectively in conformity with the Charter of the United Nations, abstention from the use of arrangements of collective defense to serve the particular interests of any of the big powers, abstention by any country from exerting pressure on other countries. 7, refraining from acts of threats, of aggression, or use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any country. Settlement of all international disputes by peaceful means, such as negotiation, conciliation, arbitration, or judicial settlement, as well as other peaceful means of the parties' own choice, in conformity with the Charter of the United Nations, promotion of mutual interests and cooperation, and respect for justice and international obligation. It is on these principles that the NAM was founded. We, the resistance fighters of Uganda, can testify that by synthesizing the package of ideas have got very good results. Using the ideas of the free market, we use the free market principles. Like this hotel is a joint venture between the government and the private sector. In some cases, the government can have some parastatals, but in most of the cases, we encourage the private sector. So we use the ideas of the free market combined with the ideas of selective state intervention in the economy in some sectors like banking, energy, transport, etc., and also bring back some aspects of the pre-capitalist institutions, such as the reformed cultural institutions of Uganda. Uganda, although starting from a very low base, has had growth rates of 6.2% per annum for the last 37 years. We are therefore not impressed and cannot be part of the morbid, I want the word morbid, sickly, of the morbid bigotry of uni-ideological thinking of this or that type. When somebody says, this is the only correct idea, this is the only correct idea. If you don't believe in this, I will attack you. Really? The universe has been here for the last 30 billion years. This earth has been here for 30 billion years. The human society has been here for the last 4.5 million years. Now you come, within 20 years, you think what you think is the only correct thing. You must be sick. You therefore should not have the audacity to impose on the society you live in, let alone the world, your narrow, uni-ideological orientation. Here in Uganda, we rejected the concept of uni-ideological positions. Our movement started as a multi-ideological political force. We had capitalists, we had socialists, we had Marxists, we had feudalists. They're all. That's why we call our movement, not party. Because a party is uni-ideological. Communist party, capitalist party, those are uni-ideological. Our force is multi-ideological because that's what fits our society. In conclusion, the strength of the non-aligned movement should be used to exercise considerable influence, particularly at the UN, for the effective transformative process for a better common future. In the negotiations for the Pact of the Future, the outcome document of the upcoming United Nations Summit of the Future, to be held in New York in September 2024, we should clearly define priorities that favor in New York has my full support to chair the coordinating bureau of the non-aligned movement. I thank you, and I welcome you all to Uganda. Thank you very much. Chechi Dako.
Now you give the floor to Cuba Vice President, Chair of G7.
Program
here.
Oh, here? Okay. I'm getting trained to be chairman. The man is training me how to be chairman. Now, I now know my job now. I now invite His Excellency Salvador Paredes Mesa, Vice President of the Republic of Cuba and Chairperson of the Group of 77 and China, to address us.
Gracias, estimado presidente Yoweri Museveni, estimado jefe de Estado y de Gobierno.
Esteemed heads of state and government and heads of delegations. It is a great honor and privilege to participate in this important event in the African continent. Apparently there seems to be an issue with the microphone, says the interpreter. It is a great honor and privilege to participate in this important event here in Africa. Africa is the land of our ancestors. Africa is part of the essence of our homeland and of the community. This year, which marks the 50th anniversary of the establishment of our bilateral relations, it was an honor to visit the sister nation of Uganda and reaffirm the historical bonds of friendship and cooperation that unite us. We are holding this 19th summit after more than 6 decades of joint efforts aimed at preserving the unity of the non-aligned countries' movement. Non-aligned movement has been a leading advocate of many just causes in the world, among them the struggle against colonialism, neocolonialism, fascism, racism, and apartheid. Our movement promoted key initiatives in favor of development, such as the achievement of a new international economic order. It has raised its voice several times against aggressions, against war, and the imposition of unfair sanctions and unilateral coercive measures against our nations. Today, faced with new global challenges, It is essential, it is imperative that we keep our forces united. We need to coordinate positions and ensure that our voice is heard in defense of the aspirations and just demands of our peoples. Cuba, in its condition as chair of the Group of 77 and China, has undertaken to promote unity, solidarity, and cooperation among the countries of the South. We urgently need to coordinate our nations in the face of the current international order, which is deeply unjust, it is excluding, and it is discriminatory towards our peoples. We reaffirm our strong rejection against the implementation of unilateral coercive measures which have been imposed on several members of our movement. Cuba would like to underscore its support to the right of the people of Western Sahara to self-determination. We express also our unequivocal support to the right of Puerto Rico to exercise its self-determination and independence. Excellencies, since last October the 7th, we have been witness to one of the cruelest genocidal acts ever to be recorded by history. With impunity and repulsive brutality, Israel has submitted the Palestinian people to a collective punishment that has already taken the lives of more than 20,000 innocent civilians as its toll. How can the Western countries, who claim to be so civilized, justify the murder of women and children in Gaza, the indiscriminate bombings of hospitals and schools, and the deprivation of access to safe water and food? We could further ask, as was done by the historical leader of our Cuban Revolution, Fidel Castro, in a summit like this back in 1979. Is it not true that we can observe in this irrefutable demonstration of imperialism's aggressive role and the kind of order and peace they would wish to impose on our peoples? Cuba suggests the non-aligned movement being consistent with the historical support to the independent and sovereign state within the borders prior to 1967, with East Jerusalem as its capital, or calling the prompt incorporation of the State of Palestine as a fully fledged member state of the United Nations. Excellencies, every historical epoch brings about its own challenges, and the current times bring about challenges which are key and decisive for the future of humanity. The current global order in force is characterized by multiple crises: extreme social polarization, increasing asymmetries, geopolitical conflicts, and an erosion and weakening of multilateralism. Exclusion, ethnicity, and inequality continue to perpetuate. The international financial architecture designed by the wealthiest countries for their own benefit continues to be a stumbling block to the developmental aspirations of our nations. At the current rate of progress, none of the agreed 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda, the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda, would be or could be achieved. Yet we face the fact that military budgets are reaching exorbitant figures. Climate change is threatening the survival of the human species. And our countries, the ones that least contribute to the environmental crisis, are the ones which are most vulnerable to its impact. The financial commitments entered into by the industrialized countries, the ones that bear primary responsibility for depredation and global overheating are
Desde el sur demandamos una urgente
very insufficient. From the south, let us call for an urgent democratization of the international relations system. This is what we stated in September last during the summit of the G77 in China that we were honored to host in Havana. It is possible to guarantee proud, prosperous and sustainable living standards for the majorities, the great majorities of this population, so long as the huge capacities that are there and exist to create wealth and well-being are used equitably and fairly. Only cooperation and solidarity among all countries will be effective to be able to cope with the colossal challenges of present and future times. The wealthiest countries have no excuses not to meet their commitment to assign at least 0.7% of their gross domestic product to official development assistance. It is shocking that the nations of the South should have to allocate at least 14% of their income to pay for interests associated to foreign debt, and that the least developed countries are paying interest rates that are 8 times higher than those of developed countries. I reaffirm Cuba's commitment to international fraternal cooperation, in particular South-South cooperation, based on mutual respect, selfless assistance, and complementarity. Despite our limited resources and the brutal blockade that we have faced in Cuba, we shall maintain our cooperation with other countries in need to the extent of our possibilities, following our principle of sharing with modesty what we have. Dear participants, Washington's economic warfare against Cuba has not ceased for a single day for more than 60 years. There is not a single Cuban family spared from its terrible effects. It is the longest-lasting, most comprehensive and cruelest system of unilateral coercive measures that have ever been imposed against any nation, designed to force the surrender of an entire people via hunger and desperation. The criminal and illegal economic, commercial and financial blockade imposed by the United States against Cuba has reached unprecedented levels of aggressiveness and has been reinforced to extremes, and is thus becoming the main stumbling block to the development, to the dreams of prosperity and development of more than 11 million Cubans. In these circumstances, we appreciate even more the firm rejection expressed by the non-aligned movement against its criminal policy. On behalf of our people, I also thank the members of the NAM for their rejection of the unwarranted inclusion of Cuba in the unilateral and spurious list drawn up by the United States of states sponsors of terrorism. This immoral and unfounded action by the United States government has curtailed to very high levels the flow of financial resources into our country, led them to a minimum. It is an insult to the truth and an outrage to all Cubans, who have been victims of many terrorist acts perpetrated from the US territory against us for decades, even now as I speak. Brothers and sisters, we would like to thank and congratulate Azerbaijan for its outstanding work in running this movement during a particularly complex period marked by the COVID-19 pandemic, which demanded additional efforts on all of us. We wish Uganda the greatest of success as President of the movement during the 2024-2026 triennium, and it will always be able to count on Cuba's full support. We have struggled together to get to where we are now, and together we have won transcendental victories for our nations. Together we shall continue to wage the necessary battle for a proud, just, prosperous and sustainable future for our peoples. And Cuba will always be on the front line of that battle. We should not forget the words of the historical leader of the Cuban Revolution when, during the summit of our movement in Cartagena de Indias almost 30 years ago, and which today are more valid than ever, and I quote, "We are not mere spectators. The world is also our world. No one can replace our united action. Nobody will speak on our behalf. Oh, we alone, and only united, can reject the unjust world economic and political order that they would like to impose on our people." Thank you very much.
I now give the floor to His Excellency Denis Francis, President of the 78th session of the United Nations General Assembly.
Your Excellency Yoweri Museveni, President of the Republic of Uganda and Chairman of the Non-Aligned Movement. Your Excellency Ceyhun Bayramov, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Azerbaijan, speaking on behalf of the outgoing Chairman of the movement. Your Excellencies, the heads of state and government of the movement, Mr. Moussa Faki, Chairman of the Commission of the African Union, esteemed ministers, permanent representatives, distinguished delegates. I am deeply honored to join you in Kampala today on the occasion of the 19th Summit of the Non-Aligned Movement. I am especially grateful to His Excellency Mr. Yoweri Museveni, the President of Uganda, and to the government and people of Uganda for their invitation and gracious hospitality. Let me also convey my warm congratulations to the government of Uganda on assuming the chairmanship of the movement. Your known, astute, and insightful leadership assures me that under your guidance, NAM will effectively tackle forthcoming challenges, bolstering both its profile and influence. Allow me also to commend the outgoing chairman, the President of Azerbaijan, His Excellency Ilham Aliyev, for his successful stewardship of the movement during difficult times, and notably in broadening its connection with the people through initiatives like the NAM Parliamentary Network and the NAM Youth Organization. This year's summit theme, Deepening Cooperation for Shared Global Affluence, recalls the movement's founding principles of cooperation and collaboration, urgent prescriptions in the current setting. Our world is beset with profound, multifaceted challenges. which demand creativity and consensus building to fashion effective solutions. Unhappily, it is precisely in the opposite direction that we are headed. Widening inequalities are breeding fresh grievances, while mistrust and geopolitical competition are hampering efforts to realize our aspirations of achieving sustainable development by 2030. In Ukraine, the Middle East, and here in Africa, crises and conflicts are laying bare the limits of the multilateral system, raising legitimate questions as to the relevance and value of the United Nations itself in terms of its ability to resolve global issues, and whether we, as a global community, can deliver the promise of peace and prosperity for all. There is no doubt that the world is deeply fragmented, complicating the mission and undermining the traditional mechanisms adopted by the United Nations in addressing major problems. And while we must, out of necessity, engage in introspection and adopt more effective strategies and methods to achieve delivery and meaningful impact, the one thing we must work hard to avoid is the loss of our ability to find common purpose and to act decisively when the moment demands it. I must tell you that I am deeply concerned and indeed dismayed about the ongoing calamity in the Gaza Strip. And so I call upon this movement to exert its influence in bringing a halt to the carnage that we are haplessly witnessing. That situation behoves us to ask, how much is enough? And does the very concept of enough even exist in this setting? Looking to the future of the region, I reiterate my urgent call on all parties to refrain from any action that could further spill over into neighboring countries. The General Assembly, encompassing the voice of the vast majority of member states, has been clear. In that regard, I renew the demand for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire and for the release of all hostages. This stands as the only credible course of action to authentically address, let alone resolve, this conflict. The wanton prosecution of violence only inspires intergenerational and cyclical appetites for retribution and reprisal. After various iterations of war over several decades, I am convinced that a negotiated political solution is the sole path through which both Israelis and Palestinians will see realized their fundamental right to a life of peace based on the two-state solution. As President of the General Assembly, I will support and encourage any and all initiatives to that end. You can count on me to remain steadfast in that commitment. It is precisely for these reasons that I chose peace as the first of 4 priorities of my presidency, reflecting its foundational importance as a prerequisite for achieving prosperity, progress, and sustainability for all. The history of NAM itself teaches us important lessons that remain valid today, bearing in mind that the movement was formed at a time of unprecedented global division, when the world appeared to be on the brink. Given NAM's commitment to and advocacy for peace, representing more than half of the global population, it has an indispensable role in guiding our world pragmatically towards a more secure, more just, and more prosperous future for all, where harmony and peace prevail. Excellencies, as we make complex choices about the kind of world we wish to forge, we must never lose sight of the fact that today's challenges, be it war, poverty, natural disasters, climate change and sea level rise, energy crises and food shortages, all have a human face. In whatever way we respond, we must ensure that we always assign pride of place to the human dimensions and consequences of our actions. Pursuit of a human-centered vision of international cooperation offers the prospect of refocusing the international community's attention away from a path of self-destruction towards one of safe and just evolution. To that end, let us strengthen the prospect for peace through investing in human security. Let us respect and uphold human rights. And let us keep human welfare and human dignity at the very center of all that we do. This is clearly the intent of the Charter in the expressions, "We the peoples of the United Nations." This includes ensuring that the technologies revolutionizing our existence do much more to cement our shared humanity rather than to subdue and to subordinate it. As Kofi Annan wisely observed nearly 2 decades ago, no society can long remain prosperous without the rule of law and respect for human rights. As you set about strategizing how best to employ the NAM formula of cooperation to achieve shared global affluence, I am hopeful that you will keep the late Secretary General's precepts in mind. As the UN's largest group, constituting 2/3 of the membership, NAM's critical mass empowers it to play an influential role in shifting the balance of the geopolitical landscape from conflict and confrontation to diplomacy, from suspicion and mistrust to trust-building dialogue, and from violence and aggression to tolerance, understanding, and peace. To move the dial, we need swift action in priority areas. On nuclear disarmament, NAM has the capacity and the influence to contribute to the de-escalation of confrontation by promoting multilateralism as the core principle of negotiation and multilateral diplomacy as the means of achieving progress. In the area of conflict prevention, NAM countries can lead the way by upholding international norms, respecting human rights, and vehemently countering entrenched racism, intolerance, and xenophobic attitudes that provide fertile ground for terrorism and discord, and for conflict and strife. I urge the NAM to undertake an in-depth assessment of the new agenda for peace, given its focus on conflict prevention. Perhaps nowhere is the value of international cooperation of more profound consequence than in our pursuit of a sustainable future for all. Indeed, our promise to leave no one behind hinges on our ability to build strong and diverse partnerships, share knowledge widely and strategically, and strengthen our joint capacities to reach the most vulnerable. The Summit of the Future in September 2024 will offer an historic opportunity to fast-track the achievement of the SDGs and forge a new global consensus to transform our multilateral system to deliver with better impact for people and planet. Ahead of the summit in April 2024, I will host the first ever Sustainability Week in the General Assembly, the flagship initiative of my presidency, featuring mandated high-level events on transport, tourism, infrastructure, and energy, as well as a signature event on debt sustainability. I invite the members of the movement, both individually and collectively, to engage meaningfully in these events and to participate at the highest levels possible, to take lead in shaping the new multilateral frameworks that will carry us into the coming decades. The potential of the NAM to drive substantive progress across the global agenda, especially in fostering peace and security, remains formidable. My team and I are ready to support the Ugandan chairmanship in any effort to further elevate NAM's strategic engagement and influence as we mold the future for safety and security and for shared affluence. Together, let us therefore deepen our cooperation. Let us work fervently together to rebuild trust and to open new pathways of cooperation and partnership to ensure that, indeed, global affluence is shared equitably by all so that no one is left behind. I thank you.
I want to thank His Excellency Francis. I now invite His Excellency Moussa Faki, Chairperson of the African Union Commission.
Your Excellency Yoweri Kaguta Museveni, President of the Republic of Uganda and the Chair of the 19th Summit of Head of State and Government of Non-Aligned Movement.